Thank you, Victor. Good morning. So I have to be totally honest. It was only a few minutes ago that I looked down and I realized that I am delivering the Parker B. Francis Distinguished Lecture. I thought I was just giving a speech. So when I see this ups the deal for me, and it's somewhat more intimidating and unnerving than I thought, because I talk about politics, but when I see I've got to give a lecture, and not only that, it has to be distinguished, I worry. I will try to, when I think about a distinguished lecture, I think of somebody kind of droning on about important, deep policy thoughts. And I rarely have thoughts that are either important, deep, or policy-oriented. I always tell people I'm at the bottom of the political food chain. I'm a handicapper. I don't come here to tell you what you're supposed to think about anything, about any subjects, about the president, about health care reform, about immigration, about U.S. policy in the Middle East. I don't really care what you think. I figure believe me, listening to the people who've already talked here, it's very clear that this group is intelligent and educated and thoughtful and serious and caring, and you don't need me to tell you what to think about stuff. And particularly a group of this size, I assume there are people who have views all over the place. I don't try to change your mind on stuff. I try to explain what's going on to help you understand, to help you look for things over the next few months and the next really 2 years. And I figure you can decide who you like or who you don't like, but I try to give you the context. So I always try to be thoughtful and analytic and serious, but also a little bit fun. And I hope that won't run contrary to the distinguished nature of my presentation. Now, there is one kicker that I have. Who knew? Who knew? Sometimes you never know. Something is going to work just right. Distinguished. Is there anything I ever done that is particularly distinguished? Well, I've given a lot of speeches to important groups. I don't know whether that means it rubs off on me. I have a PhD, but 90% of the people in this room seem to have advanced degrees, so that's not so impressive. But how many people in here, I would never do this normally, how many people in here were 12 down in yesterday's New York Times crossword puzzle? So if you don't believe me, get the Sunday magazine, New York Times magazine, go and you'll see 12 down, political analyst Rothenberg. So they needed Stu, S-T-U. They needed 3 letters. And I had a friend of mine, Norm Ornstein, who gives speeches. He's probably given a speech here at one point. Norm I consider him far more distinguished than I am. And Norm emailed me, a number of people emailed me about it yesterday. Norm emailed me, he said, wow, Sunday New York Times, I'm really jealous. And I wrote back, Norm, your first name is 4 letters, mine is 3, I had the advantage. And another friend emailed me that now it's me and Uma Thurman who are 3-letter names in crossword puzzles. All right, so I've got about a half an hour or so to talk about where we are politically, where we're going. Obviously, I'm going to touch on health care because it's part of the discussion we've been having now for a number of years. I mean, we've been having many, many decades, actually, but the nature of the discussion ramped up in 2009, 2010 with the ACA and the like. And then I'm going to look forward to, speculatively, to 16 as to who you should look at on the D side or on the R side and what kind of political stuff we should expect over the next few months. Normally I do Q&A, but the crowd is too large. We're not set up for that. So if there's time at the end, I will ask myself questions. So so where are we politically? Well, you know, if you're at all, if you read the papers, if you watch the NewsHour, things like that, I mean, you know, we've been in political gridlock for a long time in Washington. There's nothing that's going to change dramatically, but it's really interesting to understand why that's the case and how we got here. And so just very quickly, what happened in last November? So it was a big Republican year. Republicans gained 13 House seats, 9 Senate seats. The Republicans have not had more members of the U.S. House of Representatives than they do now. You have to go back to the 1920s before they had more members. They took over the Senate. People didn't think that they were going to gain at least 6 seats. They gained 9 seats. We've had 2 dramatic midterm elections with President Obama in the White House that appear to be rejections of him. And in fact, they were rejections of him. Both elections turned out to be referenda each one was a referendum on the president. And the voters were very clear. Now, I look at survey data all the time. I look at history. I try to put things in context. And if you're a supporter of the president and you want to say, well, the Republicans were unfair, the attacks were unfair, they were funded by the Koch brothers' dollars, they didn't help the president while he's been in office. Their entire attitude has been that we want to defeat him, we want to keep him a one-term president, and then after he was reelected, they wanted to stop him. They wanted to roll back ACA. I mean, if that is your view, that's not an unreasonable view, that the Republicans have not cooperated with the White House. And so sure, they've been able to take him down, but because they didn't want him to succeed. You know, there's an element of truth to that. If you're a Republican, your attitude's going to be, he went too far, too fast, he hasn't worked the Hill, his personality and his attitude is dismissive of people who don't agree with him, he's sure he's right and you're wrong. No wonder the Republicans didn't work with him, and not only that, he's far too liberal in the country. That's not where the country is. And if that's your attitude, if that's your interpretation, there's something to be said for that as well. There's some truth to that. There's truth to both sides. But coming out of the election, these elections, the Democrats said the elections is not about Barack Obama, it's about how extreme the Republicans are. It's about the Tea Party. It's about they don't have a positive agenda. They're against everything. That's what the Democratic argument was. Oh, and the other part of the Democratic argument was these elections are about individual candidates. So if you're from Louisiana, the Democrats said, look, the election is about Mary Landrieu, not Barack Obama. It's about Mary Landrieu versus Republican Bill Cassidy. Or in Arkansas, it's about Mark Pryor versus Tom Cotton. It's not about Barack Obama. Well, sorry, but midterm elections, when voters are unhappy, are about the president. They just are. That's the way voters see things. Voters don't have a vote for president in a midterm election. They do have a vote for a senator or a congressman. That's the only federal votes they have. And they use those votes as a way to express pleasure or displeasure with the larger political environment. And when they think about who runs the country, people tend to think the president runs the country. Obviously, that's a little simplistic, but presumably the president is supposed to set a direction for where we're going, and people say they like it or don't like it. And in 10 and 14, they didn't. So it's as simple as that. So the Republicans see the election results, and what's the Republican attitude? Well, the voters have just told us they're sending us to Washington to check Barack Obama. That's our job. And they don't agree with him. They don't agree with him on ACA. They don't agree with his position on immigration. They don't agree with him on his position with Iraq or the Middle East or ISIS or ISIL or one of the various names we're calling that group there, the Islamic State. And we are going to be there to take him on because the voters voted us there. That's their view. And what's the Democrat view of what happened? Well, I told you, some of it is, it's the Koch brothers, they bought that election. Some of it is the map happened to be terrible in 2014. Do you remember the Senate map in 2014? There were 7 Democratic senators up for election, re-election. Some of them chose not to run for re-election, but 7 Democratic senators were up in states that voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. Arkansas, Louisiana, South Dakota, West Virginia. Alaska. And these were all reddish states, some quite red, some very anti-Obama. Look at President Obama's numbers in 2008 and 2012 in states like Arkansas and Louisiana and Kentucky and Tennessee, kind of a swath of states running from West Virginia over here down all the way to East Texas and Oklahoma. And he did terribly in those states. And there were a number of Senate races there. And so the Democrats are going to say, well, the Republicans won in Republican states. And the Koch brothers bought the election. The president said something else interestingly. Do you remember after the election, the president came out and he said, well, I did hear the voters. I saw the election results and I heard the voters. But I also heard the people who didn't vote. Do you remember that? He said that. He said, I heard the voters, but I also heard the people who didn't vote. To which I immediately thought, he's got good hearing. Now, I knew what he meant. I certainly knew what he meant. If you're president of the whole country. You're president of everybody. You've got an obligation to do what's best for the country, whether or not they voted or didn't vote, whether or not they supported you or opposed you. You have a larger role and a larger obligation. He was also saying if those people who didn't vote had voted, they would have voted for me or for Democratic candidates. Might have been right. The fall off in a midterm election between a presidential year and a midterm year has tended to be among younger voters and Hispanic voters in the last few presidential and midterm elections, and that's what the big fall off was this last time as well. And those two constituencies have been pretty supportive of Democratic candidates. The 18 to 29 cohort has been quite supportive of the president. And if they had turned out, and if they had voted their traditional partisan votes, yeah, Democrats probably would have done better. So that's what he meant. Again, there's something to that, I think. On the other hand, the comment, the president's statement struck me as a bit dismissive of elections. I mean, we do have them periodically, and there's a reason we have them. There's an opportunity to people to go and express their opinions. And if they choose not to, for whatever reason, I guess that's their business, but it also says something about their commitment to the system and their desire to make a statement. And if they really supported one side or the other, they probably would vote. And if they don't, I don't know, elections, you've heard the phrase, elections have consequences, right? Aren't they supposed to have consequences? Otherwise, why should we bother having elections? We'll just do a Zogby poll, God forbid, and ask young people what they think, and we'll overweight the respondents if they're not showing up at the polls, and then we'll just decide policy. We won't have elections. So, we coming out of the election, the Republicans think they've won an election. They have a mandate to check the president. The White House, on one hand, kind of dismisses the election itself and explains away things. And you have an election that didn't produce any change. Oh, it produced change in control of the Senate. That's a big deal. Who has a majority in the committees? Who is the committee chairman? Who's organizing the Senate? Who's deciding what legislation to bring up? Certainly, Harry Reid was very aggressive in trying to move the Senate in the direction he wanted, and McConnell will do the same thing now, but it didn't change the tone in Washington, and it didn't change how the parties view things. And then there's something else. The parties look back to learn about the voters, to explain their behavior, to decide how they should act. You know, politicians, as a general rule, they try to understand where the country is and where the voters are as they kind of change and kind of alter or change the emphasis on their agenda. You remember Bill Clinton after the '94 election when the Democrats got spanked badly after, remember, Clinton health care, Hillary care, and the like? And I remember, I may have told this story to you actually, to some of you might have heard it. I remember being in the green room a few years ago at the show. It's now off the air. Most of the shows I do get canceled. Chuck Todd had a show called The Daily Rundown in the morning. It was a good straight political show. There are fewer and fewer straight political shows. Now it's mostly if you watch MSNBC, it's liberals and progressives attacking conservatives. And if you watch Fox, it's conservatives attacking liberals and progressives. And if you're one of the 8 people in the country who are still watching CNN, congratulations. I mean, I used to be a CNN political analyst, but I'm the wrong demographic these days. But anyway, so I remember I was in the green room a few years ago, and remember Dee Dee Myers, Clinton's press secretary? She was in a green room, and we were talking about the 2010 midterm election where Democrats got spanked. And I was asking her about that, and she reminded me, she said, you know, the difference between President Clinton and Obama is after the '94 election, Bill Clinton's reaction was, oh my gosh, they hate me. I've got to change my agenda. We got to work with Republicans in Congress. They won the election. The voters rejected me. I need to do what I have to get their support again, to show them that they can trust me, to become more in sync with their views. And Dee Dee said, you know, that's because President Clinton had this part of his personality where he needed to be loved. I said, yes, I understand that, Dee Dee. And she said, but the difference is, Bill Clinton had this need for people to like him. Barack Obama doesn't have that need. He doesn't need you to respect him, to tell him he's smart. He already knows he's smart, and he doesn't need you to tell him that. And he knows where he thinks the country needs to go, and he knows what he thinks the country's problem is. And an election, a midterm, whether it's 2010 or 2014, is not going to get him to switch. So we have this loggerhead developing, but it gets worse. It gets worse because if you're a Democrat, if you're a political advisor to the White House or to Harry Reid or to Hillary Clinton or Elizabeth Warren or whomever, and you look 2 years down the road, not backward to the 2014, but forward to the 2016 election, you know what you see? You see a potentially really good Democratic year. You see a whole different message that may come from the voters. Why? Well, it's a presidential year 16, which means we have a different demographic makeup of the electorate. The makeup in midterm elections, the people who participate in midterm elections tend to be older and whiter. And that, my friends, is the definition of the Republican Party. Older and whiter. In presidential years, we have an uptick in 18 to 29-year-old participation, Hispanic participation, and suddenly the electorate is much, much different. So if you look at the percentage of race is a very important predictor of the vote. I mean, not 100%, but if you look simply at race, whites as a percentage of the electorate, in the late 1980s, whites constituted something close to 88% of all voters in the electorate. And now we're down into the low 70s. We may well hit 70% in the next election. Now, when you look at how Hispanics and African Americans vote in terms of party, you see they're very different than older white voters. So if you're a Democratic strategist, you say, wait a minute, yeah, we just had this bad election, but we don't need to cave to the Republicans because in 2 years we're going to have this different electorate. We're going to have a presidential electorate, and we're more likely to win there, and we'll regain all this ground. And even more than that, you look at the Senate class, next Senate class. The next Senate class has 24 Republican senators up for re-election and 10 Democrats. And there are no Democrats up in Romney's states, and there are, I think, 7 Republican senators up in Obama states. Mark Kirk in this state, Illinois, won in 2010, beat a deeply flawed Democratic Senate candidate, Alexei Giannoulis. Remember him? Was that a Giannoulis, right? Or was it Giannopoulos? Giannoulis. He was state treasurer at the time. Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire. Marco Rubio in Florida. Rob Portman in Ohio. Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. These are all in Obama states, and they're all Republicans up. So you're a Democratic strategist. You could say, we got a great chance to take back the Senate. Not only that, if you're Barack Obama, what do you look at? You look at the most recent right direction, wrong track numbers. Is the country headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track? And I'll just give you the NBC News Wall Street Journal numbers since I like that poll the best. So this is a very standard question that's asked. Is the country headed in the right direction or off on the wrong track? It does not say thinking about health care, the cost or the coverage. It does not say thinking about ISIS. It does not say thinking about taxes on the billionaires. It just says, is the country headed in the right direction or wrong track? You think how you would answer that? The numbers have been going up. So if you're Barack Obama, you're going to say to yourself, well, the country, things have turned around. The economy has turned around and sentiment has turned around. Is the country headed in the right direction or wrong track? NBC News, Wall Street Journal, I'm just going to give you right direction. Yeah, it's gone in the right direction. In November, 25% of you said the right direction. In December, the right direction was 27. In January, the right direction was 31. And in February, the right direction was 34. Now, if you're a Republican in the audience, you might want to raise your hand at this point and say, but what's the wrong track, Stu? 12 down. So the number right now is right direction 34, wrong track 61. So 6 out of 10 of you, if this audience was representative of a normal audience, and you ain't, trust me, I see you, I heard you up here. But if you were representative of the country as a whole, 6 out of 10 still would say the country's headed off on the wrong track. But there has been a significant change in sentiment. And most elections are about sentiment. How we doing? Good, bad? Are people hopeful, upbeat, optimistic? Or are they pessimistic, disappointed, fearful, worried? And there's been enough of a change of mood that if you're a Democrat, it feeds into your sense of we finally turned things around. And not only that, if you're a Democrat, you absolutely positively have to be thinking, well, the Republicans control the House and the Senate. You know they're going to totally screw up. It's not an unreasonable bet, is it? They have screwed up repeatedly in the past, and there's a deep division in the Republican Party still between the Tea Party folks and the establishment folks. So all of this combines to make it very, very difficult to get anything done. I'm not telling you nothing can get done in Washington. Stuff can get done, as long as it's not ideologically polarizing, as long as it's not partisan, as long as it's doesn't require big deals, big compromises by groups. I'm talking about things like immigration reform, tax reform, the big stuff. We can't get that stuff done. Everybody agrees we need some tax reform, but the devil's always in the details, like all those years with health care. But look at the ACA. How did they get that done? The Democrats had 60 seats in the Senate. They had a big majority in the House, and they had a new president. And they barely got it done at the last minute with some legislative leisure demand, whatever that word is, sleight of hand. Do you remember that I think Arlen Specter switched parties in April of 2009. Scott Brown was elected to Ted Kennedy's seat in Massachusetts in January of 2010. And the Democrats had this opportunity, and they struggled. Remember, public option, no public option, and it was like pulling teeth. And finally, at the last minute, when they had to get it done, they got it done. But the big stuff is hard to do. So I'm not telling you you can't get any, whatever your agenda is, the big stuff is really difficult. There's ways to get stuff done. You just have to understand it's half a yard in a cloud of dust, because we're just in a very confrontational period. The Republicans still want to get rid of the ACA. They're going to continue to introduce legislation to cut funding, to do anything they can to restrict it, and the president's not going along. And on these big picture things, that's the way the situation is. You're just going to have to deal with it and understand the limits to what you can get done and try to figure out new and novel ways to make arguments and, frankly, put together bipartisan coalitions. But it's really tough because the atmosphere in town in D.C. is poisoned. Everything is partisan. Everything is ideological. And the biggest thing is neither side trusts the other side. They have a very low opinion of the other side's integrity, trustworthiness, and fairness. And you can point to If you're a Republican, you can point to things the president has done to justify that view. And if you're a Democrat, you can point to stuff that Boehner and McConnell and the Tea Party and the Republicans have done to justify that view. Some people try to decide who's more to blame. I guess if I had to, I would say the Republicans are at the moment the bigger problem because they're divided as a party between the establishment and the Tea Party and Libertarian wing on the other side. And so they don't have their act together, as you can see in the House of Representatives, where John Boehner can't guarantee he can put a majority together on anything. They have their own problem that the Democrats don't have yet. But it's coming to the Democrats, too. I've been talking about this for 3 or 4 years, where the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, you may or may not be in it, you may or may not like them or hold them in utter contempt, it's up to you, feel free. But the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is increasingly vocal and has looked and seen what the Tea Party has done to the Republicans, and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party says, why shouldn't we do that too? We're tired of selling out to corporate Democrats. We're tired of Hillary Clinton going to have lunch with the CEO of Goldman Sachs. We need a more progressive Democratic agenda. We need someone who's going to really fight for the people, not for Wall Street Democrats, not for Rahm Emanuel. And so I think you're going to see this division in the Democratic Party continue to percolate. You're not going to see it a full-scale rebellion as long as you have this president in the White House. But if you put certain Democrats in the White House, you may see much more angst, division, anger within the Democratic Party, because our system has kind of changed. We don't have hierarchies anymore. You seem to have something here, and I happen to think hierarchies work to some extent, but you know, we're in a very broad period of democratization of everything. And it's particularly hit the media, where if you have a website, apparently that makes you an authority on any subject you want to talk about and worth listening to. And so when you've had the national media being undermined, you've had political parties undermined. You know, I know some of you might, I don't know how many of you, any of you come from Chicago. I know a few people come from Chicago. Chicago used to have stuff and it still does, has more of an organization. We used to refer to them disparagingly as bosses. But if you're from Chicago, there used to be a Democratic machine or organization here. If you're from Nassau, Suffolk County in New York, there was a Republican machine or organization there. Or Delaware County in Pennsylvania, there was a Republican war board there was a Republican organization. But now these organizations have these centers of hierarchy and power, people who've grown up through the system, have lost a lot of their influence to MSNBC, Fox, to the people on the internet. If you're a conservative Republican, you probably go to townhall.com. If you're a Democrat, you go to Huffington Post or Daily Kos or something like that, and you get your news there, and you get your organizing. And so it's made it harder for anybody and everything to work together. I've got 5 minutes to run through the Republican field, and I will do that. So let me start right now. Look, Hillary is a prohibitive favorite for the Democratic nomination, but Democratic voters would rather vote for Elizabeth Warren. Now, maybe there's somebody in the audience who says, no, I really would prefer Hillary to Elizabeth Warren. It's Hillary's turn. She's got foreign policy. She's done every job. She's a great Secretary of State, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. I understand that. But I'm making a general point that the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is increasingly with Elizabeth Warren. I truly believe that. And it doesn't show up in the polls now because people don't assume she's running. In fact, she says she's not running. And for most of you, you know Hillary. She's been around a while. If you're a Democrat, you've built up some loyalty to her and her husband. But she's had a terrible 4 or 5 weeks, really terrible. I mean, she's looked sloppy. And I mean, I don't mean physically sloppy. I mean, when she came out for the press conference, the answers weren't particularly good. And first, they didn't answer for a long time. And it's just, it hasn't gone well. And, you know, we are in a period where it's all about change and being new and being different and having new ideas. And although if you listen to Karen Finnegan, who's a Democratic talking head, and there have been some polls showing that voters think Hillary is new, I guess those people were in a cave somewhere. I think once a campaign got going underway, people would remember, oh, yeah, I remember that Hillary stuff. No, I didn't like that. I forgot about that. So I think she has a problem over the long haul. Look, she'll still be a heavy favorite to be the nominee. There's nobody set to change her. She lost the nomination last time. In one respect, it was kind of a fluke. Remember, 2008, she was a vision of change. She was the woman, and she was going to be different. We've never had a woman president. That made her new. That made her compelling. That made her interesting. That took the Democrats embraced her as well. We can finally make a statement about equality and fairness and justice and hope for the future. And then came along somebody else who kind of trumped everything she had, who was more than that, who was more compelling, who was more a statement about change, who was more a statement about justice and fairness in the future, Barack Obama, right? I wrote a piece, I don't know if it was controversial, saying Barack Obama, would he have been nominated if he was white? And the answer was, of course not. Because some white senator, first-term senator from Illinois, wouldn't have been able to beat Hillary Clinton. He wouldn't have been different. He wouldn't have been compelling. He wouldn't have touched the soul of Democrats. They couldn't have gotten excited about him. This is not to degrade him. This doesn't mean that he shouldn't have been nominated or wasn't a good president or whatever, but I'm just saying. So now, Hillary doesn't have something to trump her. I guess I can imagine somebody with certain qualities that could trump her, but we don't see anybody on the horizon. And Elizabeth Warren's a woman, and that doesn't trump another woman. But still, she has problems. The Republican race depends on, there are a series of lanes in the Republican race. My colleague, friend, competitor Charlie Cook puts it like the NCAA basketball field where there are brackets. And that's good, but I also like the running or swimming lanes because there are elements of the Republican Party is totally fractured. They're totally screwed up at the moment, and there's no sign that's going to change. They got an establishment lane. That's Jeb Bush. Chris Christie thinks he's in the lane, but I think he jumped in and all the water went out of the pool. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. Mitt Romney was going to be in that lane, but it's Jeb. I was talking to somebody who's a bundler fundraiser for Marco Rubio the other day, who told me that he thinks that Jeb could come in the end of the first quarter. So it'll be reported April 15th. It's a March 31. Are there 31 days in March? Are there, whatever, however many days are in March. Then he may come in with $80 million raised. More than anybody else or more than anybody else in Rand Paul. I'm not sure how much he's going to raise. He's going to raise a ton of money too. But I don't know what you think of Bush. Bush Clinton. Now there's something new. All right. So you have Jeb, who is serious, thoughtful, analytic, and wrong, according to many in his party, on Common Core and immigration. Probably a lot of you think he's right, but those of you who think that are certainly not Republicans are going to be voting in the Republican caucuses in Iowa. So you have Jeb. You have Rand Paul, who's got the libertarian sort of Tea Party wing. Can raise a lot of money. He's thoughtful. He's serious. He's got some problems in the Republican Party. I just told you Jeb has problems with Common Core and immigration and the perception that he's too much establishment. Rand Paul has got problems on foreign policy, national security, where he doesn't believe in a muscular U.S. foreign policy. Most Republicans do. That's a problem for him. Plus, he's more libertarian on a whole set of issues. There is a libertarian wing of the Republican Party, but it's not a majority. He's got a problem. Then there's the kind of conservative evangelical lane. It's a lane that's done well in the Iowa caucuses. Mike Huckabee and Rick Santorum have won the last 2 Iowa caucuses for the Republicans. Huckabee is running again. Santorum is running again. Dr. Ben Carson, an incredibly successful, accomplished pediatric neurologist, is running in that lane as well. Bobby Jindal, the governor of Louisiana, who I thought was going to run in a different lane, he got confused. I think he got in the wrong lane. But somehow he got in that lane. I know why he got in that lane, because that lane wins the Iowa caucuses often. So you got candidates there, and somebody's going to be in there. And then you have the 4th lane, which I think is mostly governors, Midwest governors, but also includes a senator. I think it includes people who are conservative but have the potential to appeal both to the establishment and to the Tea Party folks. And this includes Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, who was serious and thoughtful, proclaimed himself yesterday or the day before to be the front runner in the Republican race. Well, we'll forget about him now. That's over. Took on the labor unions in Wisconsin, but has a style that's more acceptable generally to the establishment. Marco Rubio, current senator from Florida, who can give one hell of a speech, Cuban-American, articulate. My question always was there enough heft there? Could he talk about issues? Could he raise money? He's doing so pretty well. I think he's in there. And then if John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, gets in there, he may be in that lane. Mike Pence, the governor of Indiana, might run. He hasn't said he's even going to be in there. And so we have these lanes. In the Republican race, the really thing about the Republican race to remember, it is wide open. This never happens. I jokingly, over the years, I'm going to stop doing this after Brian Williams got in trouble. I jokingly used to say the Republicans have this little-known paragraph in their platform that says the party must, absolutely must, nominate the next old white guy in line. Because that's what they always did, right? Bob Dole, John McCain, Mitt Romney was second last time. Okay, Mitt, you're first. That's the way they've been. There is no old white guy in line now. That's the problem. There's no line. Jeb is sort of developing it as the guy in line, but he has some significant problems, and the party has changed. It's become angrier, more confrontational. The bottom line is the Electoral College gives the Democrats a narrow advantage. Turnout models for demographic groups in a presidential year gives the Democrats a narrow advantage. But we've had 8 years of Barack Obama, and it's hard for one party to win the White House 3 times in a row. It's been done, all right? It was done relatively recently in your and my lifetime, right? 8 years of Bush and 8 years of Reagan and a term of George H.W. Bush. Maybe he wouldn't have gotten there if Michael Dukakis hadn't gotten in that tank and put on a combat helmet and looked silly. But that's rare that happens. So I think we're headed for a very important election. I think you'll see health care discussed as an issue. Republicans can't get off the issue. Even if somebody like Jeb is nominated, he won't want to push that. He's going to want to push jobs. But the Tea Party folks, the Rand Paul wing of the party, the Mike Lee, senator from Utah wing of the party, are going to want to keep pushing that. I think health care will continue to be a big issue, along with other things of taxes and spending and immigration, and increasingly, foreign policy and national security. I think it's a big deal. You know, when you look around, things are a mess. I mean, we have all these problems. We can't deal with some of the biggest problems that absolutely cry out to being dealt with. Then there are other national security, foreign policy problems where the world has appeared to have, you know, gosh, I longingly think back of those wonderful days of bipolarity when the Soviets and we had all these missiles and were planning to kill one another. Gosh, those were the good old days. But now there are all these centers of power with independent views on religion and life and Western civilization, and it's real difficult. I wish I could leave you here with some great, profound thought of optimism, but I can only tell you this. We somehow seem to bumble along. And remember, it was all about the government was going to shut down, and we can't fund the government, and we can't deal with these big issues, and how terrible things were. And in 2008, 9, 10, 11, it looked like our economy was permanently, you know, we'd gone the way of Japan. We were failing as a great economic power. And now there are signs, significant signs, whether it's in kind of biomedicine or the healthcare and the pharma and the bio companies, or new technologies. There seem to be, somehow we always seem to figure out a way to stumble ahead. And I think we're going to go through a period of division here for another few years. I don't expect anything big to happen. But it's up to you to go out, you talk to your member of Congress, you work through your groups here, ACHE, your college, various groups, to promote your agenda. And you just have to do that knowing that at some point we're going to bust through this gridlock and things are going to work, things are going to get better. Thanks very much.